My name is Pat Grady. I'm a solution engineer at AdSwerve, and I'll be walking you through the foundations of digital marketing. Let's go ahead and get started.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode in this series on advanced analytics and digital marketing. And today we're going to be taking a look at the foundations of digital marketing technology. And I think it's important to review these concepts at a foundational level just to make sure that we gain some fluency and improve our vocabulary in thinking about managing our conversations with the tech teams and product teams that support digital marketers. And so, of course, this could be very rudimentary to some folks, especially folks with software development and website development backgrounds. But I think a lot of digital marketers don't necessarily have that background, so I figured we'd start with this and then, of course, move on to the more advanced topics later on throughout the series. These series will be organized in basically the first part of every episode will be a lecture, just a review, hands-on review of some of the concepts, and then an actual hands and keyboard in the platform, looking at code, looking at infrastructure, looking at the things that are done at an operational and tactical level. So let's go ahead and get started. Episode 1, we're going to be looking at cookies and how they're used by digital marketers. We're going to be looking at the HTTP request lifecycle, request and response lifecycle that carries those cookies and transmits all the sort of web assets that are being rendered to the customers on your site, and then actually looking at the web server technology and the architecture of that. So let's go ahead and get started. In the HTTP request response lifecycle, what we're talking about is the flow is a user entering a URL into a browser. So me entering adswerve.com into my Chrome browser, the browser packaging up that request in HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol, which the protocol is just a standardized way of two computers talking to each other. The server living as an asset owned by adswerve.com, receives that information, thinks about it, processes it, and then returns a response back to the browser in the form of typically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so that the browser can then interpret that information and render that experience. So let's take a quick look at that using our Chrome Developer Tool set to the Network tab. Safari has a similar tab where you can inspect all the hits going in and out of the request. So I'm going to ask for a web page, and then we see all of these different requests being populated. It gets going, it's going, it's going. 222 requests that were all kind of loaded asynchronously from the moment that the request was made. So we're actually interested in the very first document that gets exchanged. It's the very first thing that is responding. The server is responding to it with that request, and then all subsequent documents, so 221 of the documents and assets that were being loaded actually were derived from the instructions encoded into this original document, which this document is saying like, hey, go get these images, go get these CSS, go get these JavaScript files, all these different sort of concepts that are telling the browser, like, this is what I need to go from something very ugly like this, which is just the raw text encoded in that hypertext transfer, to something very pretty like this, which is, the culmination of all the different HTML, CSS, and JavaScript working together to create these cohesive experiences. Also, this experience is being measured. And so we'll take a quick look at that. In the measurement, we're going to introduce the concept of cookies and looking at where cookies are part of this whole HTTP request response lifecycle. And so I made an initial request for adswerve.com. That request was processed and received. Now, additionally, we know that there were lots and lots of extra HTTP requests that were happening. In fact, if we look at one of those specifically, we're going to dial into the Google Analytics pixel request. So if I run a search or a filter for collect, then we do see other products outside of just Google Analytics, but I happen to know that the Google Analytics one is actually communicating through my first-party server, t.adswerve.com. That stands for tracking.adswerve.com. That's a function of Google Tag Manager server-side being used, so we can actually set cookies in a first domain and HTTP-only secure context. And when we're talking about HTTP-only, when we go and look at the actual cookies themselves that are being set, in this request, we see that no FPID or first-party identifier was included in the request, but the server responded with a cookie. If I look at the headers, I can again see that the request contained no FPID cookie. It did, however, contain some Google Analytics cookies, which is the client-side ID or the client ID of Google Analytics. But the FPID actually came from the response. So the server had actually received the request for that collect hit, and then it responded back with a set HTTP only cookie. And so the response, we see these set cookie flags in the header of the HTTP request, which the HTTP request typically contains headers. and then a body. In this case, the body is just simply the request URL itself and the request method, and then the remote IP address, and then the response actually includes headers as well and a body. The body in this particular case the body was very simple. It was just saying like the status code was a 200, which just means that it was received, and then it actually sets a cookie called the FPID, which is really important for Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics to be able to set durable cookies. And so the FPID, we're actually going to see how one would use that in a subsequent request where we can start to introduce the idea of personalization for pseudo-anonymous customers, so people who have not logged into your website. So that request of the collect hit or the very next hit that comes from the page. So if I request a new document like about us, if we go inspect that document, get rid of the collect, and actually look at this document itself, it actually contains a cookie in the request itself. It's the FPID. It's the same value that was set previously. It also contains the Google Client ID and other interesting cookies related to other marketing platforms like the Facebook ID, HubSpot, all these different marketing tools that we're using on our website. And the subsequent request actually contains that cookie in the request itself, and so we can actually see that when the request with this HTTP only cookie is transmitted and processed to the Cloud Run server, then the Cloud Run server can actually access that cookie, and only the server can access an HTTP only cookie. The browser is protecting the information contained within that cookie from any third party from accessing that information. Only the server that lives on adswerve.com can access that. By definition, it's defined within the actual cookie itself. We do see that the FPID is an HTTP only and secure cookie. So only the server can access that information. And one of the cool things that you can do with that information is actually store key value pairs or cross-reference key value pairs, with the key being the cookie itself, the identifier, and the value being anything you want it to be to create dynamic experiences for your users. So for example, one of the things that we do at AdSwerve for our customers is we observe previous traffic on the website for that durable first-party identifier, and then we make predictions about what that customer would be interested in. So if we ever see them again, then in the next time they come to the website, then we're able to query for that information and then actually respond with it in a very fast, low latency manner, and be able to serve now, rather than static content, serve a dynamically rendered content that actually can augment the user experience with customization and all kinds of ideas that improve the customer experience, but also can balance, improving business outcomes at the same time. So very, very powerful for a marketer to be able to leverage this. And the underpinning of all of this is actually cookies and the HTTP response lifecycle and general web server architecture, which web server architecture from the olden days, we would talk about the model, the view, and the controller, MVC. In this case, the controller would be considered the server itself that acts as a router. It receives information and then just decides where that information needs to go. The model is where the data is stored about that helps to dynamically render the experience. And then the view is just how that experience is actually presented to the customer to be consumed. So that's that's modern. The more modern sort of representation that really is just to look at something like this, which is where you have clients like devices that are requesting information from ultimately a server, but we have network topology that sort of sits in between that, like a globally distributed cloud distribution network. We have a cloud load balancing platform, which is able to sort of globally receive any request. It's intelligent. It's monitoring where the IP is, where that IP exists in the world, and then routing the technology to the appropriate assets. So routing that technology maybe not to the North American Cloud Run instance, but maybe to a European Cloud Run instance if the device is located in the EU. As an example, that's sort of what cloud load balancing can do. In addition, the cloud load balancing can expect the request and look for things like, let's see, that's the response. Let's actually look at the request itself. It can be looking for things like cache control. In this case, I'm manually setting to disable cache, but if I were to uncheck that disable cache and then reload the page, go and fetch my document, who we are, and then now look at the request headers, we'll actually see that the cache control has an age set. It's not no cache, it's it now actually has a cache that's available. We probably need to adjust that. A cache equals, or max age equals 0 isn't necessarily an optimal configuration for a page that is otherwise static. But anyways, that's something for my IT team to work out. I am interested in measurement. So let's go ahead and keep looking at this. So the load balancing is really doing a lot of work. And if it decides that something can be cached and is allowed to be cached, then it goes and tells the content delivery network about it. The content delivery network can go and serve out of the cache directly. Or if the load balancer needs to grab statically defined assets, then it can go route that information to cloud storage. It can also, like for example, images and JavaScript files and CSS files, font files, video files that all can live statically in a storage environment. Also, sometimes you need to go and get actual dynamic information and have a server process that initial request and respond back with the appropriate information. The Cloud Run server in this case is able to receive that request, process the information, and cross-reference a model, a database for that special key value pair. And then finally, in this solution, we have the ability to sort of store really sensitive values in a super secure secret manager concept within Google Cloud. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is actually implement this Google Cloud marketing, or actually, no, it's not marketing. It's just Google Cloud Jumpstart. And we are going to take a look at the Jumpstart solutions built by the solutions team over at Google Cloud, and we can look at that initial list of Jumpstart solutions. And the one that I'm going to be demonstrating in the very next video is actually installing this dynamic website. And we're going to be doing a dynamic web app using Cloud Run. And when we do that, the technology that we're going to be installing is all referenced here. We just took a look at that and we can get started for free. And there's a solution guide to go along with it. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the very next video. So hope to see you there. And thanks very much for watching.